What's up, wrestling fans? It is time for another edition of The Voice of Wrestling right here on voiceofwrestling.net. And of course, if you're watching us on Fight TV, we want to say thank you as well. They sent out a notification last week, and I noticed a couple of fans went in there and watched us, which was awesome. They ran us during their live showings, and really appreciate the relationship that we now have with Fight TV. So make sure you go check them out at FITE.TV, fight.tv, and of course download their app as well. But as always, I'm your host, Chris Cash, alongside Nick Paglino. And Nick over there, man, we've got, again, plenty to talk about this week. But I guess just to kind of start things off a little bit, Nick, how's your week been, buddy?
The week's been good. I mean, I feel like every time we hop on the air, we're talking about the pay-per-view that just took place last week, and then we're previewing the pay-per-view that's taking place next week.
There's
we are
coming
up on WWE Backlash, which is going to be the third pay-per-view in under a month that WWE is running. And I think when we preview Backlash, we'll talk a little bit more about, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because this pay-per-view kind of has really sort of snuck up on everybody. Just doing good here, though. From our perspective, it's a good thing because it gives us a lot to talk about and a lot to react to. But for some of the fans, I'm not too sure. But we'll talk about that. But other than that, doing good. Check out ProWrestling.com, of course, for all of the coverage of Backlash that's going to be happening this Sunday night.
Yeah, man, I feel like next week we'll be talking about WrestleMania and previewing it.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about WrestleMania. It'll be time to preview WrestleMania 35.
But we don't have a lot of time because we've got a very special guest, and she was fun to talk to. SoCal Val is actually coming up here in just a little bit. And, of course, next week, guys, we also have Johnny Fairplay. I sat down with him to talk, and it's also a very good interview. So SoCal Val coming up, though, and that's going to be an interesting talking point. The Greatest Royal Rumble event, of course, the controversy over the women not being able to go there. She chimed in on that. We're going to talk about the Greatest Royal Rumble. We're going to preview Backlash, but we're going to start off like we always do with the main event. And this week on the main event, it's Roman Reigns round 2. Nick, you and I tried to come up with something else to talk about this week on the main event. You know, it's our main talking point.
Yeah.
It's really what we want to dive into every week. And we had to talk about this after Backlash, or not Backlash, after the Greatest Royal Rumble, after last week's Raw, after, of course, this week's Raw. There's still so much to talk about as it relates to Roman Reigns and WWE's treatment of him and the fans' treatment of him, and then WWE's reactive treatment of him because of the treatment of him by the fans. It really it gets to a point, Nick, where you almost, trying to be an analyst of this show, you sometimes throw your hands up and start wondering, why do we bother? Because let's just get down to the kind of the beginning of it here to me as far as this week, why it's irritating both of us, I think. That Canadian crowd, that Montreal crowd was absolutely blasting him, and
it was deafening. It was, and you know, that word is used a lot, deafening. It was actually deafening. I couldn't hear what Roman Reigns was saying. And Roman Reigns, he didn't even know when to jump in to say his next line.
Yeah.
Because he just had to wait for there to be some kind of quiet from that crowd.
No, and look, I mean, here's the deal. I think it's great in a sense. I think that it's great that Roman Reigns gets such a reaction. That is what you want in a WWE superstar. But here's the problem. He is not, Nick, you mentioned before we went on the air, a column that Mike Killam put up on ProWrestling.com. So go check that out, guys, where he talks about, kind of compares the treatment of Roman Reigns right now by WWE and the fans, and then, of course, that of their treatment of John Cena, and how he hopes they don't maybe repeat the same mistakes, and they haven't really learned from history. And I think that he's spot on in some ways, but let me also say that I don't look at Roman Reigns in the same light that I look at John Cena. I think that Roman Reigns is kind of a different animal in and of himself. I think he's got true star power. I will support Roman Reigns for a while. Like, I don't think that he's a failed experiment at this point. I really don't. I do think he needs a tweak, though, and the fact that WWE will not allow someone like him, who, by the way, is already his appearance on Raw this week and his reactions to that Montreal crowd, he came off like a heel. Like, he really did.
Oh, yeah.
He came off. You guys will hear it next week. But when I sat down, I just recorded the interview with Johnny Fairplay earlier where he talked about he came off like a douchebag, which didn't say that in a sense of, hey, I hate this guy. He said it in a sense of he comes off like a great heel. So first, Nick, let's open up the discussion this way. Let me ask you why you think WWE refuses. Don't even bring John Cena into this. I mean, unless you feel like you need to. Why do they refuse? Why do they refuse to turn someone like a Roman Reigns heel? We know all the excuses they used for a John Cena, but why do you think it really does seem like, and maybe they will at some point, but it feels like, Nick, it is out of the question for WWE to turn him heel. Why do you think that is, or do you?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. You can relate this in a way to, a great story that Jake the Snake Roberts always talks about, where he says that, back when he was feuding with Hulk Hogan, when he first started feuding with him and we first saw the DDT, they did a spot, at a live event where, Jake DDT'd Hogan onto the floor, and, he busted him open, and, and the hope was that the fans were all going to rally behind Hogan because he was the babyface. But instead, after a minute or so, they all started chanting DDT because they loved the move and they loved the spot so much. After that, WWE killed the push because they didn't want Jake the Snake getting over as the babyface because they invested so much time and money into Hulk Hogan as the face of the company. Now, and one of the reasons why you might have said don't bring up John Cena is because, I understand that guys like John Cena and Hulk Hogan were sort of already established in that role.
Sure.
And Roman Reigns maybe hasn't. But the only thing I can think of, because, you and I talked about this off the air, I mean, it is literally mind-boggling. You brought this up before, and again, I mean, last night you've got the announce team saying, well, this Quebec crowd, they do things a little bit different. Do they? Or do they do things exactly the way everybody single crowd reacts to Roman Reigns? And so it becomes mind-boggling and perplexing. Why do they continue pushing this guy in a way that the fans clearly do not want? For me, it can only be one of two things. Number one, they truly view Roman Reigns as the next face of WWE. So they are getting behind him and keeping it that way, that push that they're giving him. They want to stay behind and stay committed to that push because they have money and they have time invested in this persona of Roman Reigns that they're showing you on television, and they don't want to change that in fear that if they do and they start pushing him as a heel, they're going to lose what they want to be the next true face of WWE. If it's not for that reason, then it could be, again, to bring up John Cena, that idea of, because that's what they did with John Cena, and John Cena said, I'll never turn heel, and they never turned John Cena heel because he was the face. He was the guy who sold the merchandise, and so they needed to, through thick and thin, even though the audience wasn't responding to it, they had to keep him in that role because of the sort of the business model that they were running with him as the focal point. And if they're doing that with Roman Reigns, they're going to have to stick to that, even if the fans don't necessarily want it. If it's not for those reasons, then honestly, it must just be that WWE feels that getting that reaction, I heard a lot of people in John Cena's time, when he was at the height of getting that just getting the deafening boos from the crowd, I would hear a lot of analysts defend it as, well, he gets the biggest reaction of the night. And I've never bought it because I think it's a cheap way of getting a reaction. You know, let me ask you this question. If they plucked me out of the crowd on Raw next week and had me defeat Brock Lesnar in a 1-minute match, and I became the Universal Champion, and the crowd booed me out of the building because they don't know who I am, is that good storytelling?
No.
No. So you're going about getting this reaction from the crowd to Roman Reigns in what I think is the wrong way. So this is how you're going to get that big reaction, by pushing this guy in a way that nobody clearly wants.
Right.
To me, it's just cheap storytelling. It's uncreative storytelling. It's, oh, well, I know what we'll do. You know, it's the David Arquette thing. Let's push this guy to the moon and give the fans the opposite of what they want because we know it's going to draw some kind of a response. To me, you know, you can argue all day that, hey, well, he gets the biggest response, and he did. Last night in Montreal, he probably got the biggest response out of anyone out there. But is that what you want from the guy who is the face of your company? Well, it worked for John Cena to a certain extent.
I think, and I guess my follow-up to that would be, when you compare him to a guy like John Cena, my concern is that John Cena was established, but he was also established as a massive babyface for so long, right, that they were more worried about merchandise sales and things like that, and his Make-A-Wish association, and I understood some of those things because I also still use the NWO as a classic example of how a bad group, a heel group, or a heel person can still sell merchandise if done the right way. I don't know that Roman Reigns, and maybe somebody can correct me as far as his merch sales compared to somebody else, but to me, I don't see that moving the needle enough at this point if you lose a small segment of that to A, make it up in ratings, maybe some subscribers, because it makes him a little bit more relevant at that point as a heel. Like, I don't think the needle is going to move so far drastically to this side of things if you turn him heel that he's not going to be able to make up for it, or WWE's not going to be able to make up for it in other ways because he's going to be in some really good programs. But here's my question to that, though, and so that's why the comparison to John Cena is tough for me, because I think John Cena was established as a massive babyface before the fans started reacting to him that way. And then you really did get split crowds, like completely split. That crowd this week on Raw was nowhere near split, and most crowds are not split toward Roman Reigns. So I think it's even harder for him. But what happens if they turn him heel, Nick? I mean, here's the problem that we haven't been able to actually find out what happens, because my guess is that once he gets turned heel, I'm not going to say that he's going to have the Rock effect and eventually they're going to cheer him again. But I also don't give fans a lot of credit sometimes, in the sense that I think that they are such a fickle bunch that if they got exactly what they wanted and he became this massive, massive heel, are they going to continue to boo him, or then do they actually start cheering him because they're going to enjoy him in that role when he's telling them to go screw themselves, which he should be doing as it is right now? Like, that was my thought on Raw. It's like Roman react to, like, he would sit there in silence. He would stand there in silence and let them do their thing, booing him out of the building. But then he would just carry on with what he was going to say about Brock Lesnar. And then I actually won and everything. Like, he would not actually acknowledge it, because I don't think he's given that creative freedom to go up there and be like, you guys want to boo me? Screw you. I'm going to win in spite of you. I'm going to beat Brock Lesnar. I am going to be your Universal Champion. And then I'm going to really give you something to boo about. You know, anything along those lines, because then fans are going to step back and say, wait, did he really just say that to me? And the same guys that are booing him are probably going to be like, that was good. That was great. Bravo, Mr. Roman Reigns. We're going to give you a round of applause there. And I don't know if that's the case, Nick, but it really would not surprise me if they started doing
and
that.
You know, it would get a good promo, because
sure it would.
I think that's another issue, too, is, you know, when's the last time you've really said man, did you see Roman Reigns' promo the
Yeah,
other
of
night on
course.
Raw?
Yeah.
It was excellent.
Right.
No one's saying that.
No.
So the guy, it's not like the guy's coming out there and cutting these phenomenal promos and the crowd is shutting them down.
Right.
He's going out there and he's clearly, I mean, he might as well just have a Raw script in his hand.
Yeah.
He's reading these words that some creative guy wrote because it was directed, you know, that you've got to write these style of promos for him, you know, and he's going out there and he's reading these words and it's clear that it's not connecting with the audience. And when it doesn't resonate and when the audience doesn't react, he doesn't react proportionately to what they're doing. He just kind of plods along on the same track. And that, of course, that's not his fault because he's got to get through the promo and get to the end of the promo. But I mean, again, it's you know, we get to this point here where we're having these conversations and, you know, normally I think, you know, we're doing this show and we're talking and we're analyzing. You talk about Roman Reigns, you can't help but just get
frustrated. Yeah.
Because it's really mind-boggling.
No, it is.
It's perplexing. And last night was just, and God, I couldn't believe it. I thought of you because I know you had brought up a couple weeks ago, you know, and I had missed it when you brought it up to me. You said, hey, did you hear the announce team when they made that comment? And I said, no, I didn't hear it. And then I've been paying attention. I've been looking for it every week. And last night it was clear as day.
Yeah.
Having Michael Cole, or I think it was Corey Graves. Graves saying, you know, whoa, this Quebec crowd, you know, they do things differently here. And I'm thinking, no, they're doing, if the United States crowds are giving you that reaction at volume 7, the Montreal crowd was giving you the exact same reaction. Yeah. They were just cranking it up to a volume 11,
right?
You know, and then you actually had Jonathan Coachman say, well, this feels like the Raw after WrestleMania.
No, right?
No, it doesn't. It feels like the same Raw I've been watching for the past 2 years, where the crowd is reacting in the same way. And it's getting incrementally bigger and bigger and more deafening and more deafening to the point where you're really just scratching, where I'm not listening to Roman Reigns' promo.
No, you're listening.
I'm scratching my head saying, what are they doing?
Yeah.
Why are you still doing this? You know, again, there are just so many ways that you could take this. You know, the cynic could say, well, it's stubborn Vince McMahon, and it's the stubborn management that they don't want to give in to the crowd. They don't want to give in to the fact that, you know, this is what the audience clearly does not want. They're clearly rejecting this, and it's that old theory that Vince McMahon thinks he knows best, and he knows what the audience wants more than they do. It could be that. It could be the money machine that's behind Roman Reigns and the plans that they have. But hey, you know, plans were as of last year to put the title on Reigns at WrestleMania this year, and we saw they changed those plans. So you're 100% right, man. You know, you've got plenty of talents who could step up and take over in that company. You know, but you know, that's another thing, Chris, is let me ask you this at this point. So you turn Roman Reigns heel. You know that WWE is always looking for that face of the company. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily always know that they need to have that, but you know, history always tells you it's Hulk Hogan, and then it's Stone Cold Steve Austin, you know, and then it's The Rock, and then it's John Cena. They've always got that guy who is the face of the company, right? Especially nowadays, where it's a family friendly show. You know, back in the Hogan days and in the Stone Cold Steve Austin days and the Attitude Era days, you didn't see guys appearing on the Today Show and doing all of this media like they do now. But you've got guys who are out there now who are doing the Be a Star rallies, and they're acting as ambassadors to WWE in a philanthropic sense. So you didn't have that as much then. So who is that guy if it's not Roman Reigns? Or should I say, who is that girl? To me, Ronda Rousey is your gift right now to being the face of that company right now and representing that company as your top baby face. That would be my pick. But let me ask you, if it's not Roman Reigns, who is it?
Well, and I think the problem in this particular instance is that they've protected Roman so much that they've kind of moved every guy that could be that guy over to SmackDown, like Samoa Joe,
Yeah.
Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, and Nakamura. Maybe not in that sense now that Nakamura's a heel, but of course those would be the guys that I would say first and foremost. I think that Kevin Owens has a lot of potential that is still untapped at this point over there on Raw now. But to me, I agree with you. And here's the thing. They've got to get Roman Reigns completely out of the way in order for that to obviously work. Now, the other guy that I think we're going to talk about in a minute as well as we wrap this up is Braun Strowman, ripe and primed and ready to go to the next step. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we feel maybe they're holding him back here in just a minute. But I want to make one final plea here on the main event on the Voice of Wrestling to WWE and talk a little bit about the definition of insanity. Because to me, right now, they are borderlining crossing that line in a sense that doing the same thing over and over again is really the definition of insanity. And if you expect different results, right now, every week, Nick, and you and I had to have round 2 of this on the main event because every single week, that's what we're getting. We are getting the same thing over and over again, the same response, and whether it is a stubbornness, none of it makes it right at this point. None of it can justify that for this once, please do the right thing. Give Roman Reigns the ability. He's already a heel. He's just walking and talking like a babyface, but he's a heel. He's a heel at heart at this point because I would imagine that it's got to do something no matter whether you're playing a gimmick or a character or not. He's playing a character that's supposed to be getting over with the fans, and it's not working. So there's got to be some sort of animosity already built up in this guy naturally towards the fans. So please, WWE, let him play into that because I promise, as you mentioned earlier, Nick, I bet you if you turn him heel, turn him loose, and let him go, you will start seeing some people or hearing some people, maybe even myself or Nick Paglino on this show, but other people as well, saying, hey, did you catch that promo by Roman Reigns on Monday Night Raw? You know, you would hear that if you would allow him to do it. And I don't know what's holding you back, but I don't think there's any explanation at this point, Nick, that would work for me. That would make me be like, well, yeah, you've got me. I'm stumped. I understand now why you're doing it. Because at the end of the day, this is an entertainment show first and foremost. You've got to make it the most entertaining. That's where your money comes from. That's where the subscribers come from. That's where all the pay-per-view buys used to come from. That's where the merch sales come from. Overall, you need more people watching your product, and more people will watch it when you have a bona fide heel superstar that then can make a bona fide babyface superstar when he finally gets beaten. Right now, you've got those roles reversed, and you're honestly thinking at some point, if you keep wheeling Roman Reigns out here, battered and bruised because he was whipped up on by the fans the last week, you keep doing it over and over again. You keep wheeling him out here expecting that they're going to cheer him over Brock Lesnar, who you've tried desperately to make the heel in this situation, and yet it's not working. This, to me, is Wrestling 101 and a classic example of when WWE should listen to their fans. And it just makes no sense. They put him in the
ring on Raw this week with Bobby Lashley and Braun Strowman, and those guys got booed.
But they also put him opposite the ring of two hometown guys.
Guys.
You knew that people were gonna. It really blows my mind. And yes,
I'm telling you. I think that. I mean, listen. The more we just keep perplexing over this, they want this. They are embracing this idea of him getting that reaction.
Well,
so that they can look back on it and say, well, he gets the biggest reaction.
You know what, though? Then they've lost the art of creating a true heel, which I've already thought
That's exactly right.
I've honestly thought that for a long time. But when you have one in the making right now in a Roman Reigns that you could unleash and he would be the biggest heel you've ever seen, and at least in a long time, and you're not doing it, that's just their inability at this point to kind of see the forest for the trees. Because to me, that is the money, and they're not taking advantage of it. And so hopefully, look, I don't see our conversations about Roman Reigns changing anytime soon, but maybe they'll shake some things up somehow, and we'll be able to come out here and sing a different tune. But that's the main event right here on The Voice of Wrestling. And we're back. The Voice of Wrestling, Chris Cash, Nick Paglino. And Nick, I'm excited to talk a little bit about this Friday's event because a couple of things. We'll talk a little bit about the results, Nick, here in a minute, but was it just you? Like, we ran a deal on the Voice of Wrestling website and on our YouTube channel after the fact. Later on Friday evening, Bryant Burns and Bill Thompson of Voice of Wrestling decided to go live and watch it live, but also review the show as it took place. Not as it happened, but later on in the evening when most people could actually come home from their work and watch this thing. And it was kind of like crickets. I feel like this whole event, despite the grand nature of it all, the controversy that kind of surrounded it, does it not feel like to you a little bit, Nick, that it was just kind of here and went in a matter of the blink of an eye somewhat? Because it really felt a little bit like it was a huge deal going into it, but the response thereof, I don't know if more people just didn't watch it.
Yeah.
But it's not like things didn't happen, which we're going to talk about. So it's not like, Braun Strowman, look, Braun Strowman won the greatest the actual gimmick of the entire event.
But what does that really mean?
Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute too, and I'm not saying it means anything, but I'm saying it should. I'm saying that obviously, sure. I'm saying the Undertaker just had a casket match. I mean, yes, some of these were inconsequential to a degree, but I also want to say that the way they put this event over heading into it, some of the controversy, actual mainstream controversy surrounding it, as far as the women and everything, you just felt like it was a big deal going into it, despite the time that it was actually airing. Yet now, after the fact, Nick, I guess it just feels like we're kind of back to normal. Like it was there, it came, it went, and now we're back to normal. Nothing of consequence whatsoever. Listen, what's the fucking point of it then?
It was they were paid a lot of money, and I think the expectations were, we want to see a really big show. And, it was hilarious because we reported this over ProWrestling.com, but, one of the, I guess, Saudi princes who put this show together, or who helped put it together and was part of the negotiations with WWE, he had requested certain talents be at the show. Two of them were Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, which is why they were there. They were requested to be at the show. Do you know who two other big names were that they wanted to appear on the show?
What's that?
This guy, whoever he is, the Ultimate Warrior, and Yokozuna. So clearly they're not paying attention to the product and haven't been for a long time. So I think WWE understood, well, we need to put our best foot forward in terms of our biggest stars, but we don't have to give them a great storyline show because title changes, big major storyline ramifications in terms of, the Royal Rumble winner is going to main event the next big pay-per-view or something like that. We talked a little bit about that, what would be the prize other than just a belt or a trophy, which Braun Strowman didn't even have on Raw, by the way, this week. I don't think they felt the need to book things like that because I don't think these Saudi people were really paying any attention to that. I think they were paying more attention to the spectacle and the names that were brought in. And you certainly got that. Someone on social media referred to the show as a glorified house show. And Jonathan Coachman took major offense to that. And I wouldn't make that blanket statement either. I agree with where Jonathan Coachman came from. His response was, hey, look, people worked very hard on this. There were certain production members, WWE production members, that actually lived in Saudi Arabia for almost a month getting this show together. So I wouldn't write it off as that. But on paper, what we saw in terms of the ramifications of the event, it did play more like a house show, because house shows, You go see a house show, and they have no effect on storylines. They don't have any effect on, you're not seeing title changes. You're not seeing, you had to see this show in Wichita Falls on Friday in order for Raw on Monday night to make any sense. Storylines don't advance. That's pretty much what you saw at Greatest Royal Rumble. There were no title changes. There certainly weren't any major, obviously Nakamura Styles that advanced slightly in the fact that, there was this, they're continuing. And then you go to this Royal Rumble, and other than a couple of surprise returns, which you always see in the Royal Rumble match, how was Braun Strowman any different on Raw this week compared to him on Raw last week? And we're not sitting here like we normally do. If we were doing Voice of Wrestling after Royal Rumble, what are we talking about? Like we did this year.
Yeah.
Nakamura wins.
Right.
What's the matchup going to be? AJ Styles. Let's talk about WrestleMania, because you know where those storylines are progressing to. There's really nothing to talk about.
Well, there is
coming
some
out
stuff
of this show, other than if you want to kind of break down. It was a good show. I thought there were good matches.
Well,
I really liked Styles Nakamura. I thought the ladder match was fantastic. You want to talk about the in-ring product that was delivered? I liked it.
Yeah,
but that's really all there is to talk about.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we've been talking going into this event about the controversy and everything, and the fact that WWE is being paid a ton of money, and it's not for all the stops they pulled out for this show. Clearly, they got paid a lot of money, and the women not being there, of course, it was reported that they got paid as if they did work the event. They weren't there. There's a lot of controversy that come in, but it doesn't just stop, Nick. And I think now we're going to look back at this a couple years from now, and we're going to start wondering how much this has been worth it. The relationship maybe going forward has been worth it, because WWE is in an awkward position here, Nick, in the sense that they have to almost talk up a guy, and I'm not even gonna try to pronounce the dude's name. The guy that's kind of this reformist, at least politically, a lot of people putting this guy over as far as kind of reforming Saudi Arabia as we know it. Yet, Nick, here's the issue. Like, Deadspin put up a very good article just earlier, deadspin.com. You want to go check it out. And it was entitled, WWE Saudi Arabia Event Created a Big Mess. Now, they get into several different issues that I wanted to kind of bring up, but one of the things that they talked about was Saudi Arabia and their sports committee or whatever having to apologize for just the fact that a video promo at some point, Nick, posted or that they aired showed women, and yet they had to apologize for that and said, we will be more vigilant, I think that is the word they use, or some words basically like that. I said, we'll be more vigilant in making sure that you don't see indecent women again. They're not changing the way they are anytime soon. And then,
well, I mean, okay, understand. I mean, I've been the sort of the biggest champion of the women's right movement and how it pertains to the event in Saudi Arabia. And I'll share my thoughts a little bit more about this when we talk to SoCal Val later in the show. But I think in that particular case, they were apologizing for two things. Number one, women in sports, which is absurd and ridiculous, and that better change.
Sure.
I think the other thing they were reacting to, though, was it was the women in their ring gear. And, in the United States, the women, they show a lot of cleavage. They show a lot of body. They're very provocatively dressed in WWE. If a country has a problem with that, I can respect that. When the women wrestled in Abu Dhabi, they had to cover up a little bit more. We certainly have cultural, even within our own country, there are cultural differences within the United States where some states, some communities say, well, you can get away with being dressed like this more so than somewhere else. I can respect that, because at the end of the day, I think maybe that's them just expressing their concerns over fashion and what they believe is decent for people to see. I mean, God, how many times I've watched pro wrestling with children before, and WWE, for instance, and, parents of children saying, they don't like watching the women because the women they've basically got the cleavage and everything, and they don't want their kids really seeing that. That I can understand a little bit more. I can write that off as a cultural difference a little bit more, a lot more than I could write off the fact that they have to apologize because there's women appearing in some form of sport or entertainment.
Sure.
That is degrading. That is gender segregation and demeaning, where I think the other thing is more, what do you consider tasteful appearance, tasteful dressing?
Well,
and
but
that could be said, that could apply to men or women.
But keep in mind too, I mean, it goes beyond now just the women issues, because I think it was, who was it else that had to issue an apology? Was it Daivari that had to issue an apology for a very typical pro wrestling segment where he comes out and basically plays the role of, we're far superior than you guys are here in Saudi Arabia.
Well, he was getting death threats.
Absolutely. And I mean,
so maybe he felt compelled to issue that apology because he was getting death threats.
Okay. Well, I mean, at the same time, that's an issue from a standpoint of, and maybe, I mean, I don't know how serious he took death threats from across the world. I mean, but at the same time, who knows? I feel like it's a situation in the Saudi Arabia event with WWE's relationship with them where I kind of understand, A, financially, it makes a lot of sense. B, because their culture and just some other beliefs, religious-wise or otherwise, that they have that are so polar opposites of ours, Nick. Some are gray. Some are a little bit, less consequential than others. But it's going to be more of an issue, because I think where WWE might want to see more change a little quicker going forward in some cases. They're really walking on a lot of eggshells here that I don't know how necessary it truly is and what they're truly benefiting with all of this at the end of the day. I mean, money's money. It's great. But at the same time, there's still principles. There's still American principles that are very much at odds with Saudi Arabia's belief and what WWE has to then sacrifice. Take the women also. I mean, the women are a huge part of that now. But even if that's not the only thing, I feel like there are there's going to be some resistance there. And it really, is the controversy that surrounds these events ultimately going to be worth what the payoff is? We're talking, because at the end of the day, we're not even talking about this event 3 days later.
That's the thing. Okay, but the answer to that question is, will it be worth it? How do you define worth it? If I got to see the paycheck that WWE got from that, if I was a WWE spokesman right now and I waved that fat paycheck in front of your face, then I could say from a financial standpoint, yeah, it was worth it. But look at what this has created even prior to it, with everything about the women, and after it. Because here we are now, and like I said, you're going to hear me talk a little bit about this more when we talk about SoCal Val. And one of the things I mention is that as far as the women go, I'll reserve my judgment right now. Maybe we do know that this is a long-term deal that they have in place with Saudi Arabia. Maybe part of that deal includes at some point the women getting in the ring and wrestling. If we see that in a couple years from now, certainly we will know that they have affected change. But someone was asked, an LGBT news outlet was asked, and then they published a story about Finn Balor not wearing his LGBT-friendly gear and that entrance that he's been doing at the show. And, and even though he hadn't actually been doing it for a couple of weeks before the Greatest Royal Rumble, WWE actually issued a statement. And the statement was, quote, WWE is committed to embracing individuals from all backgrounds while respecting local customs and cultural differences around the world. When I read that, I wanted to throw up. This is a country that sends homosexuals to death. That is not a cultural difference. A cultural difference is if I go to Japan and I have to take my shoes off before I eat dinner. That's not something we do here. That's a cultural difference. A cultural difference is you telling me, hey, before you travel to this country, you should know, don't give the thumbs up sign. Because in the United States, thumbs up is an affirmation. It's a positive. It's a yes. It's a good. But in this country you're traveling to, it's a sign of disrespect. That's a cultural difference. Sending people to death because of their sexual preference, that is not a cultural difference. So to see WWE write it off as such, that is a very, very hard pill for me to swallow. And so from a fan's perspective, of course this is not worth it. I saw a 5-hour wrestling show on a Friday. It was a good show. What am I going to sit here and say, well, hey, if I get to watch more wrestling shows on Friday afternoons, then I don't care that they're going to countries that are where it's going to create this kind of controversy and have this kind of reaction to people. No. But WWE is going to look at this from a completely different standpoint. They're going to continue spinning this that, well, we're trying to change things. And we have to hold our tongues on that, Chris, because we don't know yet if that's going to happen. In 2 years, we could be saying, hey, we were wrong. There's 2 championship matches now being defended by the women, in the next Saudi Arabia event. You got both titles. And and look at what they've done, and they're making these great changes. But as of right now, we really can't say that. We really don't know. But man, I don't know if it's worth it to then have these kinds of reactions and talk like this. And then if you just looked at the presentation of the show, and it really, Dave Meltzer referred to it as a propaganda machine. Right. And it really felt like that, You got John Cena standing in the middle of the ring commending Saudi Arabia, and right. I just don't know if I would have the balls to go over to that country and say something like that.
Yeah, and I think
and Corey Graves went on social media after the show and posted a picture of a beer and said, "Here's a toast to freedom of expression." And I'm paraphrasing this,
right,
but he said something like, "Here's a toast to human rights and a freedom of expression." I mean, so here's a guy who's literally, in an indirect way, he's not saying it directly, but saying, this is the country we live in compared to the country we just ran the show in.
Yeah.
And yet you're still going to do this? You're still going to go over there? Well, that's the power of the almighty dollar.
And change has to start somewhere. And so, yes, I do think in some of these cases, time will tell. Is that really on WWE's mind at this point? We don't know. Is it just the almighty dollar? But a lot of controversy, and the only newsworthy stuff coming out of this event basically are these controversial subjects that WWE generally wants to stay away from. Obviously, it's a publicly traded company, and I can't blame them. So it'll be interesting as all of this unfolds going forward, how much more of this we actually get, because it could just be the beginning. And really, when you think about it, it probably was rather tame compared to the way that it could have been. So we'll keep up with that. And as far as the newsworthy event that came, newsworthy stuff that did actually come out of the event itself, Nick, Braun Strowman won. We don't know what that really ultimately means. Raw this week didn't show much more than, hey, he's still the big tough guy. And then, of course, now as we jump into real quick before we get to SoCal Val, Backlash coming up. He is now tagging with Bobby Lashley, who might as well not have shown up to WWE, returned to WWE at this point, because he's been so lost in the mix. And now you're going to pair him with Braun Strowman, who's the ultimate big bad man in the WWE. And Bobby Lashley really should be a copy of that, yet they're not really giving him that time to shine. And I hate that for Bobby Lashley, who's truly one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. He's in amazing shape and has so much potential, I think, this time around. Yet I think he's already taken such a big step back since returning that I don't know how they're ever going to get him back to where he just doesn't have a huge response. So hopefully that'll change for him, because I really, really, really respect the hell out of Bobby Lashley. But Nick, other than that, we've got Backlash this Sunday. A lot of events, obviously, just as you mentioned earlier in the show, ton of events going on in the past couple of months, including Mania, the Greatest Royal Rumble, all of this stuff going on. So What are you expecting with this Sunday's pay-per-view?
Well, I mean, it's tough. You really got these back-to-back shows here. I think as far as the main events are concerned, I don't see Shinsuke Nakamura winning the title. I think this storyline is going to continue. I think this feud is going to continue. Shinsuke has been great as a heel. I think we're going to see another finish where someone figures out how to, AJ Styles wins via DQ or he retains via DQ or something along those lines. And ultimately this match is going to have to end in some kind of big stipulation bout. Heading into the main event, Roman Reigns, Samoa Joe, this is an interesting match. I think Roman Reigns is this guy who hasn't been able to win the big match in the past couple pay-per-views. My prediction here is Roman Reigns is going to win this match because WWE is going to feel that he needs that momentum boost. I think it's the wrong decision. Again, it just doesn't fit the picture that you're creating right now. Reigns can't win the big match. Samoa Joe just keeps hammering on him. You can't win. From a storytelling standpoint, it makes the most sense, and I'd love to see Samoa Joe kick him while he's down.
Yeah, me too.
Take that momentum from a big win over to SmackDown. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think WWE is going to feel that Roman Reigns needs to win this match, so I'm predicting the win there. It's interesting because it is a dual-branded event, so it does feel like a bigger event. It's going to be interesting to see how WWE handles these events moving forward. As far as some of the other title matches, you still have that sort of lingering idea here, though, where you have The Miz versus Seth Rollins. The Miz is not going to take the title over to SmackDown. So it's going to be interesting to see how WWE handles booking these shows moving forward, and if we're going to see these inter-brand matches. Right. I don't think it's a very good idea because I think unless people are going to take titles to other brands, you pretty much know what's going to happen. In the case of the Randy Orton versus Jeff Hardy match, obviously that's a SmackDown match, so anything could happen there, even though I'm going to pick Jeff Hardy retains. I just don't see the payoff here of having the Raw versus SmackDown match unless we know that belts could move. And that could be interesting to see, but I don't think that's going to happen on Sunday.
I want to disagree a little bit with Nakamura. I think Nakamura wins. I think
okay.
Only because I think then you do continue the storyline, and I think Nakamura, a lot of people expected for him to get his moment at WrestleMania. This is a kind of a pay-per-view now where I don't expect a lot to change from where it is, the status quo, as far as championships. And so I think you need something of substance coming out of this event. And obviously keep in mind, Styles he's been built, he's been created. He doesn't have to retain this title in order to stay relevant. And I do think the storyline continues. And most storylines, just kind of wrestling 101, generally work better with a babyface chasing the title. And if you're going to continue this for a while, the payoff really can't be Nakamura ultimately finally beating AJ Styles. At some point, you kind of have to hurry and make that switch for AJ Styles to then turn around and obviously chase it again and hopefully win it at a pretty big pay-per-view down the road. So I'm going to go with Nakamura here. I'm 100% with you, Nick, on the belief that most likely Samoa Joe is now going to be a casualty of the mess that WWE has created for themselves with Roman Reigns. And I feel like it is a sad, sad statement to make to someone like Samoa Joe, who is very over, that he's going to have to sacrifice his overness to a degree. And you can make the argument that wins and losses don't matter. I call bullshit all the time. They do matter in some ways in the grand scheme of things. So to me, a win over Roman Reigns does everything for a guy like Samoa Joe to continue the momentum that he's already established for himself. And one more loss right now to Roman Reigns, even if it's a controversial loss like it was with Brock this last time around, is not going to hurt Roman Reigns in his current situation any more than you could already say it's already been hurt. So to me, he's still, even though he's lost time and time again to Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns is still getting the reaction that WWE apparently likes him to get. So he's not going to stop getting those. And I think naturally, if he keeps losing and then coming out and trying to play it straight, like I'm still going to keep doing me, I think he's just going to keep getting booed out of the building. And so if that's what they want, he's not going to be hurt at this point. I think Samoa Joe, though, needs to keep rising because that is truly where he's at. The only problem now is I think he could have risen a little quicker on Raw if Roman Reigns wasn't there versus on SmackDown now where you've got several guys, Nick, that are obviously big superstars in the fans' eyes, and I'm going to be very interested to see kind of how they go with that. Any other quick predictions, Nick? I'm with you kind of on the IC title. I really don't see that changing hands at this point. But what's a couple of the other matches? I'm drawing a blank. Any other big ones?
Well, we've got, of course, we've got the women's matches, which, again, I just feel like coming off the heels of these two big events and WrestleMania, I'm really not predicting title changes. You have the Bludgeon Brothers, of course, defending the titles. But again, I just don't see a title change there happening. I think it would be way too soon for them to be dropping the titles at this point. I think as far as the women go, the same thing. I don't really think I could see any kind of title change with Carmella. Again, I think that's just way too soon for this to happen. And again, I don't know if that's necessarily a symptom of the creative direction that they're going in right now, or the fact that we just sort of came off the heels of these two big pay-per-views, and again, I don't know if, these Seth Rollins, who had an incredible outing on Raw and is gaining all this momentum as the Intercontinental Champion. How's he going to drop the title to Miz, and Miz is going to take the title there? Jeff Hardy, is he going to drop the title to Randy Orton? I don't see, why does Randy Orton need to win that title back, Nia Jax, who's facing Alexa Bliss, Nia Jax is gaining some really great babyface momentum as the champion. I don't see her dropping the title. Charlotte Flair, I don't see any reason why she needs to win the title back so quickly. Bobby Lashley and Strowman, of course, I see them going over because they're going to keep pushing Braun so strongly as the way they have. An interesting match could be Daniel Bryan versus Big Cass. And where do they go with Daniel Bryan? Obviously we know Daniel Bryan is slated to be facing The Miz on house show matches in May, and that's the feud I think people really want to see. So here's one of The Miz's first big singles matches back.
Yeah.
And he's facing Big Cass in his first big singles match back. So who needs to win that bout? I honestly think Big Cass needs to win that. But does he need to win it clean? Does The Miz get involved? Personally, I would love to see The Miz get involved in that match, cost Daniel Bryan the title, cost him the bout, and then really start a good, long, maybe summer-long feud with The Miz that I think should culminate in a really big special match at SummerSlam.
I'll take that even a step further, and I agree with all your other picks. So I think I would love to see Big Cass win at the expense of The Miz, and I'd love to see Big Cass take a bodyguard role with The Miz, because here's the problem. I know that they might not want to do that. He had the Enzo Amore thing going on for a little while, and I think he kind of already played that role a little bit. But to me, Big Cass, and they're wanting to put him over right now just because he was a good return to kind of bring back, but I'm not seeing him as some mega star by any stretch, so I feel like he's a good bit player, a good role player. Maybe at some point he can parlay that into something down the road, but it's going to be years down the road most likely. We've got plenty of big men that are over a ton more than he is right now. I don't know. He's hot and cold for me on the mic. So I feel like give him a real legitimate purpose. You just separated The Miz from the Miztourage. Miz really does fit the bill of somebody that does a great job with somebody backing him up, because he's going to be a heel for a while. Give him that gimmick. Give him somebody kind of back him up on the SmackDown side. Big Cass could fit that. So I love your deal at letting Big Cass go over in a controversial fashion with maybe a Miz run in or something, and then obviously pairing those guys up together. And even if they don't, I still think that's a possibility, because it does really kind of add a little heat, obviously, with the Miz Daniel Bryan storyline going forward. But if Big Cass doesn't get with Miz, I think he's going to kind of flounder a little bit after the fact, and I don't see him really making any big moves one way or the other. But Backlash is, of course, this Sunday, guys, and we'll be talking about it next week here on The Voice of Wrestling with, don't forget, special guest that I sat down with earlier today. Fun interview, man. Really fun interview. Said some interesting things about his former employer in Impact Wrestling, and then, of course, talked several subjects on the WWE front, and it was a really good conversation. So the ever controversial and entertaining Johnny Fairplay joins us next week. However, tonight, though, we're also equally excited about our special guest. SoCal Val is joining us in just a second. So for Nick Paglino, I'm Chris Cash. This is The Voice of Wrestling on voiceofwrestling.net. Check out also prowrestling.com and, of course, fight.tv. Enjoy wrestling, everybody, for the rest of the week. Of course, enjoy Backlash, and we will see you next week. In the meantime, here she is, Miss SoCal Val. All right, everybody, we are back right here on The Voice of Wrestling. Chris Cash alongside Nick Paglino. And Nick, we are joined by a special guest. For those of you following The Voice of Wrestling, or have been for many years, and surprisingly, a lot of you still remember back a decade ago, where Nick and I were doing this show, or 8-9 years ago, whatever. We used to travel a lot. TNA was popping back then. We used to go travel to Detroit to watch their pay-per-views, to cover them. Got to meet a lot of the wrestlers back then, and I remember meeting this amazing woman back then. She was the sweetest person, I think, that TNA had on their roster at the time. But she was awesome. She's doing big things now. She's actually a host as well on Fight TV, which, of course, you can find The Voice of Wrestling as well. So make sure you download the app, FITE, fight.tv as well online. We're joined by SoCal Val. And Val, I appreciate you coming on the program.
Hey, what a lovely intro. Thank you for that. I love when somebody says something about, they were a nice person that they met backstage, because isn't that the most important thing at the end of the day?
Yes, it really is the most important thing. And in doing this show for 10 years, I've never once gotten that kind of introduction from Chris.
Well, but Nick is he's not a nice person either. So, but here, look, I remember, and you've met plenty of characters in wrestling. I remember going to TNA. Of course, we've covered a lot of WWE events, a lot of indie events, and pro wrestling is such a guarded thing. So for someone like myself and someone like Nick and guys that cover the business, maybe through a podcast like ours, a website, some wrestlers at the end of the day are not the most receptive to people like us. And so when you meet some people, obviously, and there was plenty of those in TNA as well that you're probably aware of, but when you meet somebody that's always very receptive and willing to talk to you, not very standoffish, always willing to give you some time, and you always were, whether in person or through an interview like this, it was always a pleasure to talk to you, and so I'm happy to talk to you again, really find out what you're doing now, what you think about kind of the current landscape in pro wrestling in general, the women in pro wrestling, but first and foremost, for those of our fans that might not know what you're up to these days, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Fight and some of the other projects you have going on.
Well, first off, it's funny that you mentioned the thing about some people not being receptive. I always sort of use the example of, like, if I had to go get somebody for interviews in TNA or any federation for that matter, I really detest when somebody's sort of like, which version of them am I going to get that day? Is it going to be like they're really receptive and they're cool and they're happy in a good mood? Right. Or is it going to be like, they're not in a good mood? I always hope to be the kind of person, and all the people in wrestling that I count as really good friends are the type of people that I don't care what situation it is, what kind of day they're having, they're always going to be really nice bubbly, funny people, you know? So thank you for that. So what I'm doing nowadays, I should mention that I live in England, because people are always like, wait, what? You're always over there. And I'm like, no, I live there. And it's funny because I have to mention it, because it's like, I don't know, people don't realize that I live here. And it's like, well, who am I to make this big announcement like, dun, 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 I'm moving to England? I never really said that. I have family here, and I was going over a lot. And then I eventually got married over here. So, you know, the things you do for love. And I was visiting before I even met my husband here. So I was such a fan of British culture and of visiting, you know, the UK in general. So it's cool that I ended up over here. It wasn't a culture shock, because I was visiting for years before I moved. So being over here, you know, with Fight TV, who I should mention, our COO, Mike Weber, and I worked together in Impact Wrestling for years. Mike's one of those people that really believed in me when I was in Impact, more so than just doing ring girl stuff and sort of the things they would throw at me. He really got me to do, you know, really sink my teeth into interviews and video editing and really growing as a performer and as an announcer, really. So I owe him that, you know, now having the job with Fight. And it's funny, because we're kind of doing the same thing that we did in Impact. We're doing interviews, we're talking to wrestlers, we're talking to MMA fighters and boxers and things like that. And Fight being not just wrestling related, you know, we cover all combat sports. It's really interesting to go to some of these events that are not just wrestling, but being the only Fight employee in the UK, I cover a lot of our events here. Like, you know, we have WAW UK, Bellatrix, female wrestling. We have Defiant Pro Wrestling, which is formerly What Culture. For a while, we had Insane Championship Wrestling, which I highly recommend. It's out of Glasgow, Scotland. So being the Fight employee in the UK, a lot of times I'm doing interviews for them that are out of my little home studio, you know, with US wrestlers. But now I'm getting to know the whole UK scene through Fight TV, which is really cool.
Well, you know, and it's interesting, you know, just listening to you talk a lot about that, and then talk a lot about the past that you've had with TNA and Impact Wrestling. You've really seen it all, you know, and you're one of those people who has really been around when TNA started out, and when the knockouts were really becoming popular. And Chris and I have been talking a lot about, you know, the women's revolution in professional wrestling. WWE heading over to Saudi Arabia for the greatest Royal Rumble event, which has been somewhat of a controversial subject. So I think you're one of the perfect people to talk to about the women's revolution. Where did you really see it start? And for you, when you think about the women's revolution, not only in WWE, I know that's what they sort of coined that phrase, but just in pro wrestling, where do you consider the origins of that?
I mean, you know, on the indies, I've seen a lot of great women's wrestling over the years. You know, Shimmer's somebody who people sort of don't think about, but I remember from years ago, even before TNA was doing stuff with women, they were doing amazing things. And it's funny, because I've never actually physically officially worked for Shimmer. I've worked for Shine, but never really Shimmer. But I want to throw them in the mix, because I feel like people don't talk about them in terms of what they've been doing for women's wrestling for a really long time. But I have to say, you know, if you talk to Gail Kim, she's somebody who always kind of talks about how the women's revolution, as it were, like you said, they did coin the phrase, but it kind of really did originate in Impact Wrestling. I have to say that's when, you know, I think WWE took notice and kind of went, oh, they're really giving their girls a lot of airtime. You know, I think of matches with obviously Gail, who I think is one of the best wrestlers ever, Mickie James. You know, I remember there's matches with Gail Kim and Taryn Terrell. There's matches with Kong. Yeah. You know, that are so iconic and wonderful that hopefully people can go back and relive that. But that was really before a lot of the WWE stuff was happening in terms of really championing the girls. And you know, they did follow suit, and now they're doing amazing things for the women. And I'm not saying they wouldn't have done it if we did it first, but at the same time, I have to say that I think we kind of put our focus on that before they did, if I'm being honest. But, you know, it's one of those things like, you know, I talk to a lot of fans that have to pick favorites and, oh, well, this was done by this person first.
Right.
Let's just look at the big picture and say that thank God someone did it, and then they ran with it, and that now it is in this great main event space that it needed to be in for such a long time. And how cool is that? I'm somebody, too, though, that, you know, I will say that it's interesting when I'm asked about women's wrestling, because number one, I never aspired to be a wrestler, didn't really enjoy it. That's just not my thing. I do wish, if I can say one negative thing, though, that, you know, things kind of go in trends. Wrestling is very cyclical in terms of something being, you know, in fashion, you know, as it were. And as much as I love this serious women's wrestling, I'm not saying they need to bring back evening gown matches or bra and panties matches, even though I love those. But I will say that I kind of wish they had more of a mix of, like, girl managers that are kind of just more characters and managers, and serious women's wrestling. So in some ways, I love what they're doing with the serious women's wrestling, but I wouldn't mind a little more pomp and circumstance and storylines with the girls as well. So I hope they find a middle ground where it's not just we're going to go out there and kill ourselves because, we're trying to compete with the guys. That's all well and good, but I would love to see more female managers. That's where my heart was in it, the kind of the Lana characters and the, the girl managers. I do miss that. So I hope that Women's Revolution can mean wrestlers and just female characters, because there are little girls that, they, like little Val at, 12 years old watching, that I didn't want to be a wrestler. I wanted to be a Tori Wilson. I wanted to be more of the model ballet type. So I think there should be something for every little girl watching.
And there's a way that can be portrayed too. You look back and you think about women like Miss Elizabeth. They were, for me growing up watching her, I always considered her, again, like you said, of course she had the glamour and she was beautiful, but she was the brains behind the operation, and so
and
you can still
different.
Position the female valet or manager, however you want to refer to her, as a strong, inspiring character. Lana's a great example. I mean, she's one of the reasons why Rusev would pick up a lot of victories. So she's kind of the brains behind the brawn of the male wrestler. And so it is a great idea. And it is a good mix that you could get back to, because they're doing it with the guys. You've got guys that are characters and that are more over the top and more vocal. And then you've got your guys who are great in-ring workers. I think the women could be a great mix of that as well.
I totally agree. And, again, I go off of, I always say about this about wrestlers, like somebody, for example, and I get such heat for it, so here we go, I invite the heat. Undertaker is somebody that never resonated with me personally. He never did. I was a Triple H fan. When it came to the girls, I had all the respect in the world for the more serious wrestler girls, but I wasn't a fan of a huge fan really of Lita and wanting to be Lita. I thought she was cool. But it just wasn't me. I wasn't somebody who wanted to be a leader. I loved Stephanie, and still to this day, I loved that she came out and she was, now, of course, it's more known that she's, behind the scenes, whatever. But she was just the brat character that you wanted to see get the comeuppance. And she was somebody who I watched and was like, wow, what a strong female character. She takes no BS from anybody. And then she had that feud with Jericho, ongoing for years, and then the love triangle with Triple H and Kurt Angle. I loved that. So I kind of hope that they still do things like that, because I bet you if I was watching now and I was a little girl, I might not have as much interest, because there wasn't somebody like me, if that makes sense.
There's it's interesting you talk kind of the way that you do, and one of the things you mentioned earlier as far as kind of wanting a mix of the serious women that get out there and wrestle. Of course, we're getting a lot of that. TNA had a ton of that. You mentioned Awesome Kong and Gail Kim, and of course nowadays in WWE it's becoming a focal point. They're talking about the possibility of a women's match headlining and main eventing a WrestleMania potentially even next year, which would be phenomenal. There's been a little controversy though, as far as WWE taking just recently going to Saudi Arabia, of course, as far as the time of this actual recording and interview, just recently going to Saudi Arabia, and the women not going, and some fans, of course, Triple H has had to even respond to it. I'm not sure how up on the news that you are, but I'm assuming you're at least aware somewhat of the situation, and that the women couldn't go, yet WWE's there. It's a huge new agreement and relationship with Saudi Arabia. Triple H talking about hopefully they could be kind of that spark to change a little bit of the culture there, and at some point women make the trip over to Saudi Arabia. Do you have any thoughts on WWE as a company who obviously are now putting their best foot forward as it relates to the women, yet some people may be viewing this as a little bit of a step back and a slap in the face as far as the progress of women and them not being able to go? And what place do you think a company like WWE necessarily has to have as far as that conversation, and of course, what type of decisions they make as it relates to something like Saudi Arabia and the women not being able to go over there at this time?
Yeah, I think it comes down to how you can look at it negatively or positively. I'm a really positive person, so I feel like one of my strengths is kind of going, okay, well, what's the good part of this situation? And I will say that fans also, I don't really fault them for it, because they're so passionate about it, and we have such a wrestling bubble. Fans really forget that wrestling is a business, period, and WWE is a global brand. It's a global business, and the negative side to look at it is, oh my gosh, they've done so much for the Women's Revolution, now they can't even bring them over there. But this is the world we live in. That in Saudi Arabia, their laws, their morals are very different from ours. Something that maybe we don't understand. We're not from there. We don't get it. Me being a woman, I'm kind of like, what the hell is that? Of course, that's my first reaction. And then you kind of look at it and you go, wait a minute. But what were they going to do? Turn it down and not make any sort of blip on the radar in with the Saudi Arabia audience? So to me, it's like, of course they're going to take it and run with it. And hopefully maybe they will do really well over there. Then eventually they can start trickling in, a female here or there and making it happen eventually. If they said no, all they were doing is staying within that wrestling bubble and going, well, we're going to, stay on our turf, whatever. They want to expand. They want to, reach as many people globally as they can. And there's nothing wrong with that. But they do have to be respectful of their views. Whether we agree with them or not, they have to be respectful of their views. If there was a country, here's hoping, that someday decides that there should be no men on the show, well, a lot of guys have a problem with it. But guess what? If it's that country's, laws, morals, whatever, they have to abide by that if they want to reach that audience. And again, it comes down to WWE being a global business. And I think fans get very, very, they have kind of that warped, narrow view that they just think, well, how does it impact me? And, what about the girls? And they have to think that in the grand scheme of things, it's a huge decision for them to, open themselves up to a whole other part of the world that really didn't have much to do with wrestling in the first place. So kudos to them for doing it. I'm really excited for them. And I've been seeing some of my friends there posting about how they're enjoying it and how they're excited. So, it's unfortunate the girls couldn't go this time, but let's hope that they do well enough that one day they can show them what women's wrestling is all about.
Yeah, it's a good point because, if this is a long-term relationship with WWE and Saudi Arabia, then, this is step one with the greatest Royal Rumble event. Maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll look back on this and say, in hindsight, this was a really smart move because here we are 2 years later and there are 2 women's titles matches taking place in Saudi Arabia. So then they have created that change.
Yeah, it's true. And you know what? You have to be respectful. It's just sort of a weird, small comparison on my smaller scale. But for example, when I'm going to shows, I'm leaving for Germany tomorrow. It's not like a crowd that's totally family related. But for example, when I do shows, Comic Cons or wrestling shows, even the 8x10s I'm selling or even the outfit that I'm wearing, there are shows where it's 18 and up. There's an open bar. You're going to have some cleavage. You're going to wear a sexy outfit. That's one show. Then you do a show where it's, they say to me, okay, it is more families. I'm not going to be bringing, the half naked photos, which I'm very proud of. But, you have to be respectful of the particular audience that you're working.
Sure.
And if you tell me it's a family show, that's not the time to be wearing the open shirt and, having the bikini photos. You have to really be respectful of everyone who's watching because you also don't want to scare people off and just be so rigid in your ways that you can't be malleable in how you're presenting yourself and your product. So again, I think WWE made the right decision, and I hope that the fans will not have such a myopic view of that, and they'll kind of realize that it is a business, and I think a very smart business decision.
Val, I'm curious to get your thoughts a little bit on TNA, or as they're calling it, of course, Impact Wrestling these days. I know you spent a lot.
Do you still call them TNA? I do too.
I do. It's habitual, and I don't know that I'll ever stop calling them that. But you spent a lot of time there, obviously, and they gave you a lot of good opportunity. And of course, you're an optimistic, positive person, as you say. So I'm kind of curious to what type of conversation we'll have about this. But these days, it really feels as if they're kind of an afterthought. They're not, as far as in our circles, online, the internet wrestling community, it's there. And if something big happens, we'll still cover it. We still talk about it on occasion, but it just doesn't have the buzz around it that it really. Even when it felt like maybe they were having some challenging times years ago, we were still covering it because they really felt relevant regardless. And I'm not saying they're not relevant now, but I'm curious to your perception of it, being somebody that's been there, that has some personal feelings toward it. Now that you're removed at least from them for a couple of years, how do you look at their current stance now? And do you feel like they're still relevant in the grand scheme of things as it relates to the pro wrestling business?
I think they're certainly relevant, but, we'd be silly to sit here and say, like, oh, they're doing just as well as, when we were on Spike in, 2010, And I was there for 9 years, and like you said, and you poignantly pointed out that they gave me a lot of opportunities. 9 years is a really long time. And, I was there for, I'm honored to say I was there kind of during the heyday and during those amazing, TNA years, as they're called. But, I'm glad you asked me now, because if you'd asked me before WrestleMania weekend, I wouldn't really have as good of an answer or a view on it, because I haven't been around it as much. I think, I left in 2013. I went back once to do some fight interviews for like a half hour and just saw some friends and got some interviews for Fight TV. But then I really wasn't watching it much. In the UK, I wasn't really sure for a while. I think they were only on an app or something, so I couldn't watch it here. And then now I went to a show. I think I saw a few, to plug Fight TV again. On the app, I could watch some things. But I watched Bound for Glory last year, and I was really impressed with that. But then I hadn't seen it really since Bound for Glory. But WrestleMania weekend, I went to the Impact and Lucha show. They did sort of a joint show.
Right.
And it was so surreal for me, because it was like all of the people that were sort of the old school back in my day TNA people are now sort of the ones in charge, which is really cool. Like, that's how WWE is, if you think about it. All of the agents are former, okay, so I'm backstage at WWE, and I'm like, okay, there's Dean Malenko. Oh my God, there's, Pat Patterson, or there's Road Dogg. It's really cool, because these are the ones who know what it's like to be there, and they're the best people to give advice. They're the best people to agent matches. And, for example, they've got Josh Matthews now, who is so well-versed in, just social media and being a host. He's a really talented guy. They've got Sanjay Dutt back there, who, our engagement aside, Sanjay is a really talented guy, and he's somebody who, is really supportive of the younger guys, kind of the X Division style guys especially. They've got Gail Kim. I mean, who better in the world of women's wrestling to be advising these girls than Gail Kim? Before Christy left, they had Christy doing the photo shoots and doing a lot of creative stuff. Christy's one of those girls that, you talk to any girl that, especially the modeling side of things and sort of the aesthetic stuff that she was so good at. They had a lot of good people and still do. So I'm glad I could go backstage and see that. They've got Scott D'Amore, who's a really great mind in wrestling as well. I think they have all the great people backstage now that if they're going to turn it around and kind of become more relevant, I think they will. But the fact is, other than WWE, you've got some big promotions like New Japan, but let's be honest, it's so different than American wrestling. It's so friggin' far. Yeah. It's great, but it's not the same product as a big show, theatrical event like sports entertainment WWE and Impact is. So I think they're definitely still a very strong contender. They've had some of the best talent there. Girls like Chelsea Green, I think of immediately, who I think is just amazing. They've got some of the old TNA guys, but they've got a lot of new guys that are really talented. And, in terms of like business structure and stuff like that, I have no idea what's going on. All I know is they've got really good talent, and they've got a lot of great people backstage. And that's all you can do if you're trying to make a recipe for success.
And what do you think about that approach that they're taking right now, which is sort of, because like you said, seeing that Impact versus Lucha show, something I don't think fans ever really would have expected to see. And it's this part of this new idea that, or I guess the mantra that they have, which is collaboration and not competition, working with all of these other promotions. Is that something that you think is a good move for them? And was that something that maybe they just wouldn't have entertained years ago when you were in the promotion?
I will say that it's something refreshing because, for example, not to change the subject, but to shift it a bit, like it's kind of like when I was, speaking with WWE, there was certainly a stigma on TNA people going to WWE. Now I literally saw AJ at a show, and he was like, "Val, everyone's here," meaning like all of our, I had to do the accent. I can't help it.
Yeah, that was great.
Like, okay, Bobby, EY, like everybody, that was amazing in TNA is there now, which is so cool. But I think that's refreshing that stigma is completely and utterly gone. True. And in the same vein, now Impact is going, this is not an indie guy. This is a Progress Wrestling guy. This is a Lucha Underground guy. This isn't just Johnny Indie. It's almost like how, again, with the myopic views, how ridiculous does it sound that you're either WWE or you're TNA/Impact or you're an indie guy? That's not cool. Some of these guys have been on the indies forever. Back in the day, Seth Rollins was Tyler Black, the indie guy. Now it's somebody from Ring of Honor, who they're doing amazingly well, by the way, as well. So I think it's cool. I think it's making it more inclusive for independent promotions. It's giving a lot more credibility to independent promotions because a lot of these fans who don't even, surprisingly, some of them don't even realize the work that goes into being an indie wrestling performer and, those long hours on the road. And, I was doing indies for about 3 years before Impact Wrestling and doing shows for like the first 3 years, I think I made $10 in the first 3 years, just doing stuff to get your name out there and exposure and busting your ass. And for that reason, how cool is it? If say a guy wanted to get into wrestling tomorrow, what a cool time to be in wrestling that you're getting respect for being an independent, hardworking performer. And Impact is doing that and giving credibility to all these promotions. So I think it's a really good move for them. I do.
Talking with SoCal Val, follow her on Twitter, of course. She's very active on social media. On-air host for Fight TV. Check them out, FITE. Download the app, and, of course, fight.tv. Val, before we let you go, just talk a little bit more about kind of what you're doing. I noticed you started a blog, ValerieWyndham, I believe, .com, if I'm not mistaken, ValerieWyndham.com.
ValerieWyndham.net.
.net, excuse me. All right, .net. Just wanted to make sure. .net, where you're blogging about fashion. So obviously we know just from knowing you on TV, TNA, and of course Fight Now, we know you've always been very, very fashionable. So that makes a lot of sense. Talk to a little bit more about what you want to do going forward, and specifically as well, you know, what is your future and what are your goals at this point for the wrestling business specifically?
Thank you for plugging that, because the fashion blog, it's funny because I've always been into fashion, and I kind of said, okay, wrestling and fashion are my two passions, if you will. And it's funny because I was almost kind of afraid to get into fashion because I was like, what if it becomes my job and then I get a little jaded? Because no matter what job, you love it, you love it, you love it. But if you do it 24/7, you're like, all right, it becomes work. Wrestling never felt like that. Fashion is still never feels like that. And I was one of those people, especially traveling around. You can ask the guys at like 7 a.m. I'd show up in like a trench coat and like fake glasses and like have like a character at the airport. I'm like, what the hell are you doing, Val? You're like a flight attendant. I'd be like, oh my God, thank you. I would take it as a compliment because I love. The thing is, like, to put it in very blunt terms, I love creating outfits and putting outfits together. That's my jam. I love doing it. And to me, it comes very naturally to match things and to style things right and to talk about proportion and, symmetry in an outfit and why this works, why this doesn't. And what came very easily to me, I noticed that, especially talking to a lot of women, it's funny because I have mostly guy friends through wrestling. But to be honest, in real life, which the wrestlers get very annoyed when I say that because they're like, what do you mean I'm not your real life friend? I'm like, well, let's be honest. In real life, Val has 8 blondes at one table. That's my girlfriend brigade, and I'm a very girly girl. So talking to my friends, it became really apparent that style doesn't come that easily to people. And it's like the blog is kind of my way to kind of explain to people how easy and how inexpensive and frugal I shop.
Sure.
And how I put these outfits together, how you shouldn't apologize for wanting to look your best and wanting to, put an outfit together and feel fabulous and feel confident in that way. A lot of girls that I meet, young girls, could use a lot of confidence. And it's almost like they're treated wrong because if they want to like fashion and be girly, it's that they're superficial. And that's really not the case. So for me, the blog is a way to sort of open up my audience to more female viewers. Nice. Because wrestling is awesome, but it is, pretty much male dominated. Sure. So a lot of times these fashion posts, there's all kinds of wrestling stuff for the guys. I'm never going to stop doing sexy photo shoots because I enjoy them. But that's what the guys like. But the women, if I do a blog on or a post on a handbag, they love that kind of stuff. And I want to be able to be accessible to both males and females. So my goal with that is to kind of keep doing more in fashion. I've actually done quite a few London shows here. It is kind of like the Indies in the sense that you just have to ingratiate yourself with the people that you want to be around in terms of fashion. So being in a new country and kind of entering a new business, which is fashion, I've really started to kind of make my way through the different fashion shows in and around London, which is really exciting for me personally. But there's always wrestling shows around here. I don't have any intentions of stopping, the wrestling workload. I'm going to Germany tomorrow, like I said, for some shows. I've got shows, throughout the next few months that are in and around the UK. I'm getting to see the scene here firsthand, and how lucky that when I moved here is really, not saying I was the friggin' reason, but when I moved here, it's when British wrestling just sort of exploded. And I feel like that's fate because it's also kind of a reminder that I love fashion, I love other avenues, but wrestling is obviously my heart, and I love that I'm around some really up-and-coming, amazing performers and promotions here in the UK. So definitely a lot of wrestling, some fashion mixed in as well. And presenting, as we call it in the UK, or hosting, called in the US, is kind of my calling. I love talking and being an on-air personality. So something in that avenue, wrestling or otherwise, is definitely in the cards.
Hey, sure. Val, I want to put you on the spot real quick, though. And for those of you guys watching this, you don't really know the whole setup sometimes. So we've got Skype up and running. So Val is on audio, of course, but she can see Nick. She's actually not able to see me because technically I can't get all that set up. However, to put you on the spot,
so mysterious.
And let's test your skills here, your fashion skills. I'm hopeless, so I won't really even get into that. We don't need to look at what you can do to help me, but you can see Nick right now, and I feel like he might be hopeless too. But I'm curious to maybe some SoCal Val tips on what he could do. One of the issues that he has at this point in life, one of the things that he has is he looks like a terrorist sometimes. With the shave.
That's profiling.
Hey, it is.
And that also has nothing to do. It is profiling. So that has nothing to do with my physical appearance or my fashion or the way I look.
Well,
it's because I act that way, and it's my personality.
That's true too.
So please judge me by my personality.
So besides him throwing on an awful Detroit Lions T-shirt and stuff, what could Nick do a little bit to kind of better? He's a married man now. So,
and this is great, though. I'm a recently married man. He
could use all the help he could get.
Well, my advice would be this, because I'm a recently married woman, and my husband kind of jokes and says, "Well, I'm married now. I don't have to try." Clearly, let's just be honest and say that you should always be trying. I think you look great. I love that the hair is groomed and fab. I love the classic crew neck shirt. See, now I'm not a big sports ball fan, so I see Lions and I think Gryffindor. I assumed you were Hogwarts alumni, not sure. I do see the 2008, which is what we would call vintage.
Vintage.
So
this is definitely vintage. Yes, this also shows how old I am.
Yes, but
vintage.
Girls love that, So I'm going to give you an A+.
Nice.
I get an A+. This is fantastic.
A+.
Okay, if you ever come back onto the show, we'll make sure that Chris is all set up, and you can spend 4 hours diagnosing all of his problems.
Hey,
the pressure's on.
I've got
He's the one who's
plenty.
not even on camera. It's really easy for him to make fun.
I know.
Of you,
I know that. I'm a keyboard warrior at heart. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on the show, guys. Check her out, of course, on Fight TV. Check her out on Twitter at SoCal Valerie, and very active on social media. Check out her blog at ValerieWyndham.net. And Val, we really appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
And I actually have one final question that I wanted to ask, to kind of put Val on the spot. Talking a little bit about the women's revolution and everything that's going on with the women and the fantastic Charlotte Asuka match that we saw over WrestleMania weekend. There's been talk of a potential main event featuring the women at WrestleMania 35. Val, who would it be? Who would your pick be? If the women were to headline next year WrestleMania 35, what matchup would you like to see?
Ooh. Can I pick three? Can I pick a three-way?
Yeah.
There you go. Absolutely.
Because I feel like it's sort of like new school, mid, still going on school, and old school. I would love to see a Charlotte, Mickie James, Trish Stratus three-way match.
Ooh,
I think it's time Trish Stratus came back. I love all of them, but I think they're all just so damn talented. Hey, if it's WrestleMania, we can make wishes, right? I would love for Gail Kim to be back in the mix if she's, I know she's retired, but it's a dream match, right?
Yeah.
Those are some of the four that I feel like are four of my top female wrestlers of all time. They've got to bring Lisa, Victoria, Tara back as well. I don't know why no one's done that yet either. Yeah. But those are kind of, those are the women that I really think are the best of all time. But yeah, I would love to see any sort of main event at WrestleMania. I almost feel like Charlotte and Asuka, because I was there at WrestleMania, that to me kind of was the main event, if we're honest.
Yeah, a lot of people felt that way. Yeah.
Hey, Val,
thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you so much. We look forward to talking to you again, and good luck with everything you got going on.
Thank you, guys. Let's do it again soon. And again,
absolutely.
You look great, fabulous. You should be very confident.
She's talking.
I'm never gonna change out of these clothes now. This is what I'm wearing from here on out.
She was talking about me, Nick. SoCal Val, we appreciate it, guys. You've been watching The Voice of Wrestling. We'll see you next week.